I remember the time I saw the face of God. It was after my accident. I was in my car underneath a dozen others, my face fusing with the asphalt road. I don't remember the wreck itself, as I was knocked out instantly. Yet when I opened my eyes, I saw nothing. I sat buckled upside down with the right side of my face in the road for hours. Then I saw him coming down from the hellish storm that raged above. Lightning and fierce winds grew stronger until he came down. It was night and storming, but now it was like day. He came descending from the sky like the morning star, clothed in the rays of light. His robes were that of a rainbow, and more as he descended towards me. To my surprise, he came down walking casually to me like a friend, not as an all-powerful being, I assumed from the stories that would say, "Arise," and I would stand. No, he came onto the ground and shamed his golden feet on the asphalt and bloody street. He helped me out of the car, brought me onto the wet road and held his hand and helped me up. His face was gold and ivory. I could not stand to look into his eyes. His brightness burned. Instead, I looked into the shadows that surrounded us that danced around into the ray of light. I asked if it were God himself, and not one of his angels, that if he himself would come and deliver me unto heaven personally. He grinned and laughed, then responded that he is my God and he would not deliver me into heaven, that he had a plan for me, but I would need to swear my soul and loyalty to him, or he would leave me to die and be damned here, and that the choice was mine. I was never really a religious person. I knew of church and God, but had not listened to the ramblings of the pastor. I lived my life in sin. Yet here he was, my friend that knew me through my life, asking me to swear myself to him. Why wouldn't I? His perfect, beautiful face that was everything right, his loving voice that was that of dreams. I saw the faintest hint of a frown anticipating the word "nobo do." I could not disappoint God. I could not turn away from the most beautiful thing in existence. That came down to help, with repaying that kindness with the word "nobo." So I said yes. I swore myself to him. Saying those words felt wrong. Seeing his grin felt oh so wrong. But at the same time, it felt right. His hand touched my bruised and bloody skin. He kissed my brow and said that I was to answer to him and him alone. Then he stood me up and said while my words were true, he would need to see an action of my devotion to him. He turned me towards the wreck he saved me from, and I saw the true horror that was my wreck. Cars flipped over and crashed into one another. Fires starting from the gasoline and sparks. He said it was my job to go into the wreck and put those who still live out of their mercy. Kill in his name. The words that came out of his magnificent mouth were horrifying, but it came in a tune that were songs of gold. He asked if I were to disappoint him. How could I think to disappoint God? So trembling, I stepped forth into the wreck of cars. I can't remember what I did in the wreck. The memory is blank. All I remember is going into the storm of fire and metal with the sharp sting of water stabbing at me as it shot the ground. Then walking out with the fire dead and the cars drenched in blood. I came out and saw my God's arms open with tears coming down his face and pulling me into a hug. My world brightened as his arms were around me. A voice inside screamed I made a mistake that I will regret for the rest of my life. Yet as I stared into his onyx eyes, I would do it all again. The voice screamed to let go, but his arms held me tight. The voice screamed to run away and hide, but his light turned the hellish storm into a paradise. When he let go, I fell down, and he whispered, oh so gently that what I did for him would not go unpunished. I am his now, my soul, my body, my blood, my bones were his. Any thoughts of horror and regret turned to glory and hopefulness. That I don't have to die, and I can walk away with the satisfaction of life. He said, "Now, go walk." With that, I got up and walked aimlessly. I wouldn't see another human for years. I walked down empty roads, through deserts, and saw nothing. No cars, not even ambulances or anything reporting to the scene. I didn't sleep at all, but it didn't matter. I saw his gracefulness every time I blinked. I wish I could see a reflection of myself to see what humanity looked like in this world, but I struggled on. Everywhere I looked, it was a hellscape world. Without my God, everything looked abysmal. At night, I stared up into the abyss. No stars shined down on me. All I saw were eyes staring me down when I looked up. There wasn't a night where the thought that those eyes staring me down weren't those of angels. I wondered if they were jealous of me that God Himself came to me and rewarded me with His presence. That when God turned His back, if His angels casted me into hell, a place without God. I saw the sun coming in and going out, but nothing lived underneath this sun except for I. During those years in which I wandered, I thought of it as a punishment. Only then did I realize something. It wasn't a punishment. It was a reward from my God. I began to worship and praise my God, and once I did so, He came back. The return of my God was as amazing as the first time. I came to Him robed, standing on the rock, reflecting His beautiful sun rays onto the world. In His arms was a violin, and He played the most heartfelt song. It brought me to tears. His violin that He made from rock and dirt was made into gold and riches in His hand. The tune was heavenly to my ears. I was under His spell. I came towards Him blinded from His light. I asked Him where He had gone. He replied in an angelic voice that He never left me, that He was here all along waiting for me to notice. His ivory and gold face looked to the sky as He talked. I bowed to His feet as He began to talk to me. He asked if I were jealous of the others in heaven. Do I look in hatred at those who live in paradise, even if they truly deserved it whilst I do not? Am I jealous I was made in the image of an all-powerful being, but could not be perfect and live in harmony? I responded, "But I am in harmony with you, my Lord. That this place I am in is heaven. The sand I walk down might as well be a street of gold to meet you here." He said, "Open my eyes," and He disgraced His perfect hands, lightly touched my eyes, and pushed them up. Surrounding me was fire and blood. I looked down at my hands and remembered what I did to those in the wreck. I was standing on top, their corpses that surrounded me. I went to bury my face in my Lord's robe, but He was gone. He abandoned me. I screamed for Him, yet He answered me not, as beams of untold horror approached me. Things made up of shadow and nightmare whispered madness to me. And once I turned my eyes to the sky to avoid the misery, I saw Him, my advisory. He rested on clouds of wonder. The red traumatized skies clashed with the gold and innocent clouds. The angels flew and danced, not giving a damn to me below their gaze. They flew in a circle, surrounding a man in the center. He was not my God. I was chained to bodies ready to be feasted on, whilst He smiled at the crowds who sang His name in joy. Their choirs were like screeching metal on metal. Why did He sit in luxury and paradise whilst I suffer in the madness of the abyss? The more I looked at Him in His ugly figure, how He sat in glory undeserving, whilst I clawed at the bloody earth like a monster. I was crying, snarling, and growling at Him. It wasn't fair that He is with God, and I am not. Not fair that I am stuck in hell. I could only glare at heaven, and He does not even glance at me. I heard "Close your eyes," and felt wicked, pointy fingers shut my eyes closed. I wrapped my arms around the pillars that stood before me. I knew whose legs they belonged to, and I would never let them go. I asked why God would you let me suffer like that, and he responded, because I did. I stared cluelessly at him, not understanding what he said, and then he let out a heartbreaking sigh. Our adversary had stolen heaven and casted us to rot in hell instead of himself. He said, "Open your eyes again." I wept onto my Lord and begged not to have my eyes open anymore. I went to claw my eyes out, but I was stopped. A choir started before us, and he snapped my arms off their sockets before forcing my eyes open. I saw the horrifying landscape once more, my Lord standing there with me. I hung close to him, not as scared as I was before. My God's light was not as blinding as the one in the cloud. No, his light only casted shadows. Whilst the one light in the sky casted none, I could feel my Lord's anger pulsing through me. His hatred was mine, but my fear was not his. I spent a lifetime more with my Lord, but I could remember nothing. I woke up near a city and looked at the sadness below. Those poor beings, worshipping a false god. How can I live my life with those heretics? I felt my Lord's anger and knew why he saved me from the wreck. I knew his plan for me. I felt his anger that burned my skin as I stared down on those who cared not about those that were casted from heaven. They did not care about those destined to be chained to the earth and be feasted on by our own madness and despair. I felt my God's desire to show them the treatment they unknowingly gave to us. But how can I go down and do harm upon more people? But how can I reject my God, even when I knew the torture he went through? I would be betraying my Lord and worst, rejecting his plan for me and him making a mistake. Was it a mistake to pick me? Is this a mistake of thinking my God had made a fumble in his plans when he saved me? These thoughts have been going through me for years and years. I remember not a day afterwards, I questioned God. I walked through life in fear for abandoning my God, in fear of his wrath and fury. I know years have passed, yet my memory of him does not fade. My life before the accident had, my memory of even having a family is gone. All I remember is him. Every road I take is the wrong one. All my paths lead to him, back to his rock, fiddling with his violin waiting for me. I see him in the distance having a warm simile waiting for me to come to him. I want to, but I cannot do what he wants of him. I know he places a scowl on his face when I turn my back on him. I see him hide it with a smile whenever I turns toward him. He is all that I can remember. CN This story contains vivid descriptions of physical and emotional distress, including unsettling body imagery, self-inflicted harm, and themes of identity and transformation. Reader discretion is advised. Well, I remember finding the first one in my closet. I was grabbing a shirt already late for work when my hand brushed against it. Warm, rubbery, and yielding in a way that made my stomach churn. I yanked my hand back and stared at the thing draped across the hangers. A limp, hollow version of me, sagging. The husk of discarded scrap. Its face, my face, stared back, lips parted in a silent plea. The eyes were in empty, gelatinous voids. I stumbled backward, heart pounding. What the hell? My first thought was a prank. Maybe someone had broken in, made a grotesque model of me, and left it here. But no one had keys except me, and the precision was unnerving. The scar on my chin from a childhood fall, the crescent moon birthmark under my collarbone, it was all there, rendered in grotesque detail. I grabbed it by the shoulder and shook it loose. The whole thing collapsed into a heap on the floor, as weightless as air but uncomfortably warm to the touch. The closet smelled faintly of salt and decay. I shoved it into a trash bag and tossed it in the dumpster before driving to work, The image of its slack jaw burned into my memory. By noon, I'd convinced myself it was some sort of vivid hallucination brought on by stress. Too much caffeine, too little sleep. But then another appeared. This one turned up under my bed. I was searching for my phone charger, and there it was, sprawled in the shadows as if it had been waiting. The hollow replica of myself, limp and sagging, carried a new, unsettling alteration. The left hand was missing 2 fingers. When I examined my own hand, my stomach lurched. My pinky and ring finger felt cold, numb, almost alien. I spent the rest of the night awake, pacing. The discarded skins weren't hallucinations. By the end of the week, I'd found 4 more. One in the passenger seat of my car, another hanging from the shower rod, dripping as if freshly peeled. Each time, they became less complete. The one on the couch had a gaping hole where the stomach should have been. The one in the garage? Its legs ended in frayed, uneven stumps. The air around them carried a faint static charge, buzzing against my skin. Each discovery left me more hollow, more off. My reflection in the mirror didn't feel right anymore. My movements lagged, mimicking a glitching video feed. And then there was the itching. Deep beneath the skin, under muscles, along my spine. At night, I lay rigid in bed, clutching the sheets as my body writhed with an electric discomfort I couldn't scratch away. It came to a head when I decided to burn one. The 5th skin had appeared in my kitchen, slumped in front of the fridge, as though it had crawled there to die. I dragged it into the backyard, my hands shaking, the trash bag hissing against the grass. The lighter fluid splashed across its surface, glistening with an oily sheen. I lit a match, my breath hitching as the flame licked the edge. The smell hit me first, a sharp, acrid reek that turned my stomach. Then came the pain. It began in my fingers and tore through my nerves, jagged and relentless as barbed wire. I dropped the match and crumpled to my knees, screaming. A creeping pressure surged beneath my skin, straining it to the point of tearing. The fire hissed and died, the skin untouched. My hands trembled as I ran my fingers along my own arm, and that's when I felt it, a seam, almost invisible, running along my wrist. I tugged at it instinctively, and a sliver of my own skin peeled back. Beneath it I saw something. Not muscle, not bone. A gleaming dark mass, rippling with a life of its own. By morning, the itching became a torment. My flesh crawled with a million tiny, unseen legs gnawing from the inside out. I refused to look in the mirror. The reflection had grown wrong in ways I couldn't articulate, bloated, pale, stretched over bones that no longer seemed mine. My skin hung loose and clammy, as if it had been boiled and left to cool. The newest discarded skin sprawled across my bed, twisted and lifeless, a corpse dissected and abandoned. Its lips twisted into a leer that mocked every natural expression I'd ever made, teeth crooked and too large for its face. The jaw sagged open, dripping a viscous fluid onto my sheets, the stench acrid and metallic. Its hollow sockets bored into me, accusing, demanding. I couldn't bear it. Something inside snapped. I slammed the door, dragged the blinds down until the room was a darkened tomb, and staggered to the kitchen. My hands found the knife before my mind caught up. The cold steel trembled in my grip as I returned to the mirror, heart hammering. The reflection stared back, and I almost didn't recognize it. The eyes were sunken pits. My lips, cracked and scabbed, quivered against yellowed teeth. My skin, gray, translucent, and slick with sweat, clung to my frame, taut and unnatural, as if it might split at any moment. My fingers shook as I dragged the blade to the seam on my forearm. the line that had appeared days ago, mocking me with its symmetry. I pressed and sliced. Pain erupted, white-hot and electric, but it wasn't what I expected. The sensation burrowed deep, raw and satisfying, scratching an itch buried beneath the skin. The blade slid through the flesh, parting it in a jagged, bloodless line. The skin didn't bleed. It peeled, curling back in thick, mucus-slick layers that made my stomach churn. Beneath it, something pulsed, a living, glistening black mass. The surface shimmered, as if oiled, twitching in time with a heartbeat that wasn't mine. It smelled of iron and something sharper, something alive. Breathing heavily, I dug my fingers under the edges of the peeling flesh and pulled. The old skin came away in long, rubbery sheets, each strip making a wet slap as it hit the floor. My jaw clenched against the growing agony, but I couldn't stop. My muscles burned, my vision swam, but I ripped and tore until the ground was littered with fragments of my former self. When I straightened, the thing in the mirror took my breath away. It stood tall, its surface an obsidian ripple of sleek muscle and unearthly symmetry. Tendrils of faint light coursed beneath its surface, illuminating veins that pulsed with a rhythm that felt powerful, infinite. Its eyes glowed faintly, their intensity alien but familiar. They stared back at me, not with fear, but with hunger. The itching was gone. The weight, the sickness, the exhaustion, all gone. What replaced it was sharper, stronger, undeniable. I flexed my fingers, now black and fluid, watching them ripple and contract, beautiful living shadows. The old skin on the floor quivered, lifeless and grotesque, a shed chrysalis. These weren't warnings. They weren't signs of decay or disease. They were preparations. I hadn't been dying. I'd been transforming. The knife dangled in my hand, forgotten, as I gazed down at the heap of who I'd been. My lips curled into a smile, sharper and wider than it had ever been before. I turned away from the old me, opened the door, and stepped out into the waiting night. Bitch! I slammed the receiver down hard. I was not going to make the train. Grabbing my coat, I ran out the door. My mom would not drive me to the train station, so I'd have to take the bus. All along, I knew the truth. It made me sad, but I had no choice but to move on. Behind my back all this time. Boy, I was delusional, and they hid it well. New horizons were in my future, though, and that made me happy. Well, finally done. After 3 years of filth, I was free. Now I was climbing into the bus with my knapsack, containing my phone and my wallet and ID. I looked back and laughed. I did not care anymore. I just didn't. The rest is history. When I got on the train at the station, which thankfully somehow I was in time for, I filed for a divorce and called it quits. New episode. No one would know where I was because I didn't tell anybody, and I had gotten a fake ID made and got the tickets. I was actually going all the way out to Oregon, had saved up just enough. Slowly but surely, my previous life became a distant memory. I was thinking, he may be happier now, W.O. me, like relieved. My fate of newness was sealed when a young mother and her daughter came in the booth and sat down. Then my issues were no longer important. I pulled out my book page on my phone and settled in. The constant chatter kept me awake on the train, even though it was getting more dim on the outside. The trees whizzed by. We passed lakes, rivers, and mountains. I had never been this far west before. Really a magnificent country. Memories came and passed. I snoozed a little, and woke up when the train made an abrupt stop in Chicago in the middle of the night. Everything was so foreign to me, but I smiled and waved and braced myself for my new adventure. All aboard! The captain called. Another young man came in and sat down across from me. There was a lot of hustle and bustle, but we soon took off, clickety-clack down the rail, and it was 3:00 a.m. I ate my sandwich I requested, and the young man eyed me, but stayed texting. I was actually getting excited, but I slept some more. I dreamt that my ex was on an expedition and lived on another planet, always hovering over me. Would I ever escape him? I thought. My number was changed, but I had one contact, a shelter in Oregon's capital, that I wanted. When I called and told them, "I'm halfway there," they confirmed I would have a spot. I felt like playing tambourines. I was so happy. The train chugged along, and morning came, a twinkling light on the horizon bringing with it greens and blues, purples and pinks. I accepted coffee and paid, and just watched the rolling hills that turned into stone monoliths that were now ice-capped mountains. My new life awaited. When we rolled into my stop, the conductor called out, "Portland!" and I jumped off into my new territory. My crinkled-up address of the shelter was my best friend, and I used it everywhere as a passport to talk to people and ask them, "Where am I headed?" I got there, past stores. Long expanses of wasteland loomed in the distance, and I knocked on a door marked "Adult Shelter." When I rang the bell enough times, a young bouncy female finally answered the door, with a big smile and a welcome, and then checked me in. We went upstairs and she showed me my room and I said, "Hey, you did it," to myself. Finally free. Now I had to get to the business of finding a job and raising my standard of living. I walked along the coastal town and just sighed. Back at my old place of residence, I imagined they spent a little time freaking out about where I had gone. But I supposed after that, they just let it go. No one had really ever cared about me, or seen eye to eye with me. I was on my own. I was happy. I went into a pizza shop, said, "Hey, you need a dishwasher," and I was hired. Then one day I got a call from the president. "Hi, Emma T. Jones." "That's me," I responded. "How can I help you?" We're trying to anticipate an attack from outer space. We need your help in locating the source of the signal." "Okay, I'll need direct coordinates of the reception. We will have them for you." Emma?" pleaded the president of this country land mass. "Do you think you'll be using your mega hyper power storm blaster for this feat?" "Yes, possibly, sir." "Great," was the reply. "I think that'll do it for now." "Okay, thank you, Emma." "No problem, sir." I hung up and started to freak out. There was no way I'd have the storm blaster available out here in Oregon. I had to call home for it. "Mom." I looked up her hash in my phone book, on my phone. I realized I was letting her know my new phone hash, and that I was sacrificing my freedom and anonymity. But the fate of the world depended on it. I figured that was a God reason. "Emma, oh my God, girl, where have you been? We've been looking all over for you. I'm so glad you're safe." "Thanks, Mom." I gave her directions on how to retrieve the storm blaster from the garage and where I had left the key. I hoped this would work. When the president got word I was in Oregon, and my mom was responsible for maneuvering the blaster weapon, he laughed. "But you should have told us. We'll help," he insisted. The next day, a private investigator black car parked in front of my old garage, and my mom, indiscretion, though she meant well, handed them the item. Then they zoomed off. It was transported. Now I write, atop my little new apartment in Oregon, having deflected any attacks and able to breathe free, and hopefully everyone else on Earth can too. Disgrace has finally come after me. After several years of failed opportunities and increasing debts, I was left to live in solitude at my old family's house in a remote village whose name remains in obscurity. Raoul, the closest family I had at the moment, was driving into the long, dirt-beaten road until he stopped to ask, "Are you sure it's here?" I nodded, and we continued driving. It was a foggy morning, and nothing else could be seen besides the forest that surrounded us, full of trees, bushes, and strange creatures. At the end of the trail, a modest house could be seen, with some broken windows and a door that was partly destroyed. Most of the paint in the walls was gone. The small front porch was also damaged. A crest of a small owl could be seen at the front door, and it was the only part of the house that withstood the test of time. "Stop the car! This is it! This is what the letter said," I said, then got out of the car and stared at the broken home. "It sure does look like it needs some work." As Raoul left the driver's seat and picked up my small suitcase from the trunk, he commented, "I'm wondering why you never let me take a peek on that letter. I always fancied listening to a fairy tale." "This isn't a bedtime story. These are instructions," I responded angrily as I was reading once more the rest of the letter. We walked onto the front porch and I tested the door by knocking on it. Nothing happened. As I stared into the owl crest, I could swear it stared at me back, and as I opened the door, all was dark. I told Raoul to try the light switch on the closest wall, and with surprise, everything was lit up almost instantly. I could see we were standing in a small living room, full of dust and old bookcases, and after looking around, I sat in the armchair that was in the middle of the room, continuing to read the letter. "This is unbelievable. How come the electricity in this place seems to be working perfectly? The living room is impeccable, while everything outside is destroyed. There's even a cozy fireplace here. I've never seen anything like this. It is like something has been protecting this house." "Must be the owl at the door," I said sarcastically. "Ah, yes. Owls are usually associated with wisdom, but this one is terrifying," said Raoul. As he noticed the silence, he said, "Well, shall we take a look inside before I leave you by yourself? I hope I'm not doing a mistake by leaving you here alone." "The only mistake was not coming here sooner," I said. As we went from room to room, the same thing happened. The light switches lighted each room like they were just installed. The bathroom, kitchen, all again in excellent conditions, and after checking almost everything, we stumbled across a staircase which led to the second floor of the house. "Let's go upstairs," I said. We climbed carefully each step of this seemingly old wooden staircase, but not even a sound could be made until Raoul decided to jump in one of the steps. Fascinating. No sounds or cracks. Who was living here before? Must not been some while ago someone was living here. Walking through a small corridor, the walls were covered with portraits of people bearing sad expressions. A door at the left could be seen, this time with the crest of a golden cat. The most interesting thing about this door is that no doorknob could be seen. Only a small slot could be seen under the crest. "A cat and an owl. Sure, your ancestors had some imagination. I'm guessing the next crest around the house will be a lion," said Raoul. "I do understand the cat part, but not the owl." I looked into the pocket of my jacket and found a pocket watch with its case of a golden cat. I tried to fit in the pocket watch into the door slot and somehow fitted perfectly. In seconds, the door opened and a loud meow could be heard from all over the house. We both audibly gasped with the sound while the door was opening by itself. Unbelievable. Is this supposed to be real? "I never saw a door opening with a pocket watch," said Raoul, not believing what he was seeing. "And what was the meow?" "Me neither." "Well, I can't reveal much of the letter, but it said that I am supposed to use this pocket watch in proper time." "Sure, your ancestors loved awful puns." We stepped inside the room, and it was by far the most interesting part of the house. Chaos was living here. A single bed was against the wall. The walls were covered with old newspapers and magazines, most of which contents could not be understood. And on the other side, there was a desk, full of books on top, and a golden cat idol in the center sitting with an emotionless expression. What does this all mean? Can't even understand half of what is written in these walls, said Raoul. This is a time chamber, not a real one, tough, but it has been used for generations and generations. Here, take a look at that. I grabbed one of the books in the desk and showed it to Raoul. The Book of the Living, said Raoul. While checking the cover, Raoul then opened the book and started to leaf through its pages, each one being filled with different symbols along the borders of the pages. A scythe, hammer, knife, gun, and a long list of deadly objects. The number of objects would be different in each page, and some of them would be repeated several times. What was most interesting was the middle of the pages. A big illustration could be seen. It was the last moments of someone. Raoul then said, "Well, the title is a bit misleading, I have to say. All I see is dead people, and the ones that aren't dead are having a terrible time. This one is being impaled. Look at the bottom of each page. Do you recognize anything from the names there?" I mentioned. Raoul started to read. Jose Villa, Ruben Villa, Jose Villa II. Hold on, they all have the same last name as you. Check the last page. As he leafed through the last page, Raoul gasped. It is empty. No illustrations or anything. Only a name, Raoul then said. Felipe Villa. By God, it is your name. And yes, the last breath is drawn. So is the last illustration of our final moments. I said, quoting part of the letter, based on the last page, my guess is that I didn't die yet, I said sarcastically. What is this supposed to mean? Who is filling up these pages? And why is everyone dying? Said Raoul. As I share their last name and bloodline, I also share a fate worse than death, desperation. I then added, this book might seem like a curse for you, but for me it means much more. It is not death that I am scared of, but to be in this state of constant dread as I am now. I was lost for so long, but now I am blessed to finally see it. Raoul paused and then stared at me silently for a few seconds before saying, Rish, what are you going on about? You could just sell all this stuff here laying around and make some good money. You don't need this Book of the Living nonsense. No, it is not what the letter demands, I said while staring at Raoul. I don't want to be so poor that the only thing I have is gold. The golden cat idol at the desk started to breathe, and suddenly his eyes gained life. It started to gaze at us, and stretching slowly, and despite its small size, it had a threatening presence. Oh, the cat is moving. What is happening? Was it the one that meowed a few minutes ago? Asked Raoul without getting any answer while I was checking once again the letter. The cat suddenly jumped out of the desk, and a metallic clank could be heard as soon as he touched the wooden floor. He was walking on its four legs noisily, and when he reached me, he started to rub into my legs. When it got my attention, the cat was staring deep into my eyes. After a few seconds, I nodded at the cat as if I understood it, and the cat started to run through the door. I followed it at the same speed without saying a word. Hold on, wait for me, Philip. Where are you going? Said Raoul, as he started to chase both of us with the book in his hands. I went down the staircase as fast as I could, almost falling. And when I reached the living room, the cat was there, sitting on its legs, turning its back to me. Noticing my presence, the cat turned around and looked at me, then jumped so high that he reached the ceiling, magically evaporating into thin air while golden glitter and letter-shaped forms could be seen falling from the spot where it disappeared. "What happened? Where is the cat?" said Raoul once he saw me still catching his breath. "The cat has disappeared, and so the message of your doings will be spelt out to you," I said to Raoul, while reading the letter one last time. "What did the message say?" Raoul asked. "Death." As soon as I said that, I dropped the letter and stared at Raoul. The book of the living was finally beginning the finally chapter, as the first drawing started to appear. I remember the first time we saw the house. Dale was the one who found it. He had his heart set on moving out of the city, on finding somewhere quiet for us to raise Theo. Away from the noise, the pollution, the rush of everything that calloused folks around us. The house sat on a patch of land that seemed to have been forgotten by time itself. It was an old two-story farmhouse, sagging under the weight of years, its wood grayed and splintered. It leaned slightly to the left when you looked at it from the road, as if it were tired of standing. The shiplapped boards looked warped, like pages from a wet book. The windows were grimy, and the porch steps were crooked, like a homely smile. The shutters were a sun-bleached green, almost completely void of color. Beyond the property line was a thicket filled with local tree and shrub species. The yard was overgrown. Weeds and wildflowers sprouted up like survivors left over to reclaim what was theirs. The realtor, a thin, nervous woman with sharp eyes, gave us a tour of the inside. To our surprise, it wasn't nearly as tattered as the outside. Dark wooden stairs stood directly in line with the front door. To the left, a large open kitchen offered a quiet refuge. There were familiar appliances, a retro mint-colored refrigerator, and a stove that was once white but now carried a patina of grease and memories. The faded cream cabinets, cracked like old veins, added to the ambience. The well-worn wooden floors, scuffed by time, led to a small living room with green corduroy furniture. A couch, love seat, and ottoman, arranged around a heavy wooden table. An old, dusty turntable silently awaited the sound of jazz for its revival. I nudged Dale and pointed to it. This small detail was a huge deal-breaker. Tucked away from the kitchen was a bathroom that felt suspended in time. The walls, creamy but cracked, framed a gleaming clawfoot tub. A pedestal sink with porcelain handles chipping at the edges, and a tarnished silver mirror completed the vintage scene. The air was filled with a faint lavender scent, mixed with the mustiness of old wood. A small bedroom with pale yellow walls and a white wrought iron bed finished the first floor, waiting to be filled with a child's laughter. Upstairs to the left, a small study exuded calm with an oak desk, a mismatched pine chair, and an empty bookshelf stretching across the wall. A brass lamp and ink bottle were the only items on the desk, the room smelling faintly of stale tobacco. I imagined Dale sitting there, hard at work on his novel or reading the Sunday papers. Opposite the study, a larger bedroom contained a massive four-poster bed. The carved wooden headboard, softened with age, and pale blue walls created a peaceful atmosphere. Light streamed through two large windows, filling the room with a familiar snugness. The windowsill bore cigarette burns, and a cloudy ashtray held the remnants of spent tobacco. Despite its wear, the room felt serene and safe. That feeling of safety, however, was short-lived, which is when we saw the pit. It was in the backyard, large enough to swallow the whole house if it wanted to. It was more than a hole. It was an abyss, a gaping maw that seemed to stretch down into something far darker than the earth beneath it. It was not the result of a natural collapse. It couldn't be. Nor was it the work of any human hand. No. It felt wrong, as if it had been there long before the house, long before us. Something about that pit felt unnatural, like something was lurking beneath the shadows. "You may want to avoid it," the realtor said vaguely, and then rushed to another room, leaving us to gaze at the ominous hole in the earth. The edges were worn and crumbled, as if something otherworldly had dug it out. No one knows where it came from or where it leads to. No one really cared to find out, and rightfully so. That thing is petrifying. My apologies. I care to see the crawlspace, said the realtor, quickly leaving us again. Dale didn't mind it. It's just a hole, he said, shrugging as we stood on the porch, looking out at the backyard. Definitely a fixer-upper, but it's got good bones, honey. Maybe we can fill it in. Maybe it's not so bad. I thought otherwise, but I had to bite my tongue. His optimism had been our saving grace so many times before. We never intended to buy it. Not at first. But the price was almost laughable for a place that size. And so, against my better judgment, we moved in. For Theo. For the dream of a simpler life. Our only neighbor was Maria. She lived in a small, dilapidated shed even older than ours, a crumbling shack that was in near ruin. Maria was old, ancient really, and had a sharpness to her that felt as though she could cut through you like a blade. Her hair was long and white, her skin thin and weathered like an old leather satchel. But she didn't talk to us. Ever. I don't think she could. Still, there was something about her that made my skin crawl. She would stand at the edge of her sad excuse of a garden, behind her sad excuse of a house, and just stare. She was always staring. Whether it was at us or the pit, her gaze weighed down on you like 100 pounds. Her eyes were dark, impossibly black, and I never once saw her blink. She wasn't unfriendly. No, it was worse than that. She was indifferent, like she had no interest in us at all, except for the pit. Dale suggested that she was senile, which sounded believable, but not to me. It was a few weeks after we had moved in, and I had just finished unpacking the last box. Dale was plugging away on his typewriter in the study, finishing a chapter of his upcoming novel. The keys sounded like coins bouncing off one another in a rhythmic, peaceful melody. It was starting to truly feel like home. Theo had already claimed the backyard as his kingdom. He was a curious child, always running through the yard, exploring every corner of the land. I lost sight of him from the window in the kitchen. It wasn't unusual. He'd been known to wander off, chasing butterflies or climbing trees. You could always tell he was around because of his little singing voice. I realized I couldn't hear it any longer, so I called his name. There was no answer. I knew something was wrong. My heart sank into my stomach as I yelled for Dale to help me. He started searching every room in the house as I ran to the backyard, begging for Theo to show himself, hoping he would pop out from behind a tree. My eyes darted to every corner of the yard, eventually landing on Maria, who stood motionless behind her house in the muddy garden that was overgrown with a mess of weeds. Her gaze wasn't on me, but she seemed focused on something in the distance. That's when I saw Theo teetering on the edge of the pit. I remember running. He couldn't hear me. I was screaming at the top of my lungs in a full sprint towards my son, who stood at the far edge, swaying as if hypnotized. His small body was so close to the edge that it seemed impossible he wouldn't fall, yet he didn't move. His face was slack, his eyes wide and unblinking, fixed on the darkness below. "Don't fall," I begged. "Please God, don't let him fall." I reached him just as he lifted a foot to take a step forward. I grabbed his arm, yanking him back with all the force I had. He fell on top of me in the long grass, his head landing on my heaving chest. He didn't cry. He just stared blankly at me, as if nothing happened. I cried hysterically, having almost lost my little boy. Dale embraced us as we came back to our house, my puffy eyes stinging from the sweat and tears. I looked over to where Maria was standing, only to see she had disappeared into seclusion. The next day, Dale contacted the local lumberyard and began building a fence. With the help of some of the workers there, they erected a fence in less than 2 days. The fence came up to my shoulders and wrapped around our property in a horseshoe shape. It extended all the way to the road on both sides, blocking off the view of Maria's eyesore of a house. Throughout the construction, Maria stood watching the men work. It wasn't a look of curiosity. It was something darker, something disapproving. A good 25 feet beyond the fence's limits was the pit, an eerie pool of black mystery that loomed perilously. I woke to the sound of cracking wood. My eyes flashed open in worry. Dale was asleep next to me. The moonlight bounced off his stubble like a forest canopy. My eyes scanned our bedroom for any sign of the noise. The light spilled into the room, casting long shadows across the floor and the vanity. Was somebody breaking in? I thought frantically. I listened for another few seconds and heard nothing. Probably just a tree falling in the woodline. I guess it does make a sound when nobody's around. This time it was closer, more of a splintering sound. It wasn't in the house. I could tell that much. It appeared to be coming from behind the house. I jumped out of bed and ran to our windows. The only light that shone was from the moon, which flooded the uneven terrain around our backyard with heavy shadows. I scanned the silhouettes of trees in the distance and made my way up to where the pit would be. It was lost in the darkness. And then I saw her. Maria was standing at the base of the fence, tearing down the work Dale had done with his own hands. She swung an axe and struck the pickets, pulling and splintering the wood apart, her movements slow but deliberate. Several boards had been removed already, and she continued to hack at the rails on the inner side of the fence. How a woman her age could be producing that much power didn't make sense to me. It was terrifying. Theo. I shook Dale awake. Dale, I said frantically. Dale, she's ripping the fence down. His eyes looked confused, but once he heard that axe connect with the wood, he joined me at the window. His entire demeanor changed. Sylvia, go get Theo, now, he asserted. We scrambled downstairs, separating at the bottom of the stairs. I ran into Theo's room, the moonlight draped across his sleeping body. I shut the door, raced to the kitchen window, and turned on the back porch light, where I saw Maria continuing her destructive campaign. She's not even breaking a sweat. Dale approached her, yelling for her to stop. Ignoring him, she continued swinging, fracturing the wood like a crazed lumberjack. Hey, that's enough, you hag, he shouted, reaching for her shoulder. Without hesitation, Maria slammed her hand into Dale's throat, who grabbed at his neck, gasping for air. He stumbled to his knees and Maria kicked his ribs. Dale let out a squawk as he rolled backwards. Maria returned to the fence, pried the axe out of the fragmented wood, and turned back to Dale. She slowly started moving towards him with harmful intent. My eyes welled with tears as I gripped my hands over my mouth. I wanted to scream, but couldn't produce any sound. I was frozen in fear watching my husband and this deranged woman who was hell-bent with malice. Dale returned to his feet, dazed but aware of the situation, and began to backpedal towards the pit. Maria kept a constant pace and pursued him with the axe in both hands, her skin taut like a crude drum. Dale froze as he ran out of room. The porch light illuminated all the way to the pit, but nothing past it. He peered down into it and couldn't tell where it began or ended. The pungent stench of sulfur permeated the surrounding air. He turned to see Maria with her arms overhead, the cheeks of the axe illuminated under the moonlight. I shrieked like a banshee. In one swift motion, Dale lunged towards Maria and used his momentum to swing her into the pit. The silence was suffocating. She made no sound. She didn't scream. She never hit the bottom. She just disappeared into the darkness. Dale knelt in the grass, lamenting under the luminescence. In the weeks following, Dale couldn't stop drinking. The days stretched on, endless and empty. He would frequently fall asleep in the study behind a closed door. Theo would ask if Daddy was okay, and Dale would put on a fake smile and tell him, "Yee, buddy, I'm doing just fine." He didn't speak of it. Only the bottle seemed to speak for him. Every night a little more, every drink a little deeper into the abyss. Then Theo disappeared again. I didn't notice at first. The silence had become so normal. It wasn't until the sun began to dip behind the horizon that panic clawed at my chest. We yelled until our throats were raw. I feared the worst and began to cry into my hands. What if he... I choked on the rest of the words and buried my head into Dale's shoulder. This seemed to spark a fire in him. His eyes met mine, and he shook his head. "We will find him," he pronounced. "Where haven't we checked?" Our eyes simultaneously landed on the one place we feared the most, Maria's shack. Upon entering, Dale and I were horrified by our findings. The air in her shack was thick with a stifling, acrid odor that made my eyes and nose burn. Dampness seeped from every crack, the wooden beams swollen and dark with rot. The floor was uneven and slick with a layer of grime. The flickering light from several guttering candles cast long shadows that crawled across the room, like a creature in the dark. Books lie scattered haphazardly across the floor, their covers stained and their pages yellowed with age. Ancient texts opened to dog-eared pages, the ink faded and smeared by countless hands. Symbols of witchcraft scrawled on the walls, pentagrams, cryptic runes, and hastily drawn sigil pulsed with an unsettling energy. Phrases of a foreign tongue painted in blood-red strokes, their meanings as elusive as the dark forces that lingered there. A goat skull, its hollow eyes dark and empty, sat upon a rickety shelf, surrounded by tarnished amulets, cracked vials, and half-opened jars filled with cloying herbs and spices. The room felt alive with secrets, rich with danger and the promise of the unknown. "Sylvia, get out of this place. Right now," I thought. But Dale wouldn't budge. He couldn't. In all of our years of being married, I'd never seen the look that was on his face at this moment. It was a look of utter aversion. His eyes lingered at every unsightly horror within these walls. I practically dragged him out of that shack. As we stepped outside, we saw something that defied everything we'd ever experienced. I couldn't believe my eyes. I have to be hallucinating. Maria, or what appeared to be Maria, floated effortlessly in midair, several feet above the pit. Her pale, translucent skin glowed with an eerie, unearthly light. A palpable, demonic aura coiled around her, dark and swirling, like steam rising from the depths of the underworld. The air sputtered with raw energy, a magnetic force that pulled our eyes to her figure, even as our instincts told us to look away. Her hair moved as though submerged in water, flowing around her face in an ethereal halo. Her tar-black eyes, wide and unblinking, seemed to pierce through the very soul of anyone who dared to look. The air filled with the redolence of decay, a malodorous scent that was almost nauseatingly sweet. She was death reborn, powerful, untouchable, otherworldly. She floated in place, her arms outstretched, her fingers beckoning. Her mouth opened and released a shrill and unnatural screech, vibrating with an unearthly resonance that seemed to emanate from the very bottom of the pit itself. Wow, Why did he? The sound was both too loud and too soft, an agonizing contradiction that made the air crackle, as if the sound could tear apart the very fabric of reality. The name she called was distorted, a twisted echo that rang in my ears like a knife scraping across glass. Theo. No sooner than the sound ceased, Theo crawled out from beneath our crawl space, completely unscathed. I screamed his name at the top of my lungs, and Dale broke out into a sprint towards him. Theo seemed mesmerized by Maria, in a sort of trance. He ignored my cries for attention, and Dale advanced. Theo's gaze never left Maria's aura, and he started moving towards the pit, hypnotized by the preternatural. I lost all sense of reality. I bolted for my son. Dale was much closer to grabbing Theo than I was, but I didn't let up in my gait. "Please, Theo," I pleaded. "Don't do it. Come back to me." But it was too late. Dale reached for him but only grasped air. As soon as Theo jumped, Maria disappeared into thin air. There was no scream. There was only the terrible silence that stretched and stretched and stretched until it swallowed the world whole. I don't remember anything after that. Connie. Connie hurried down the hallway, her eyes darting back and forth. This part of the building made her nervous. It's where the new middle school wing connected to the original, century-old school building. There were two separate staircases at the core of this junction. The old and new alongside each other seemed like a grotesque double spine, with long rib-like hallways protruding out in all directions. She turned left. Her blood tingled through her body as she rounded the corner. The light in the next hallway had gone out. She felt the darkness stretch towards her, like it was beckoning for her. Within the spine and ribs, where heart and light should be, she found darkness. Yet, she continued forward, pursuing the abyss. The further she got, the more she had a sense that there was something waiting for her in that darkness. Lurking, prowling, stalking, and she swore that whatever it was wanted to swallow her. Arukaiwa. This city. Doho. All right, there she is, he exclaimed as he clapped his hands together and lurched towards her. As she started to speak, he wrapped his hands around her shoulders. "Dad, what's going on?" She turned her face towards him, fear immediately penetrating her. The abyss was stalking her, and now it seemed as though it was watching her through her dad's eyes. "Rick, thank ye," he said in his smooth South Tennessee accent. "Better get on the road before." "May God." She felt his voice was louder than it needed to be. In the car, the friendly demeanor her dad withheld in the office disintegrated. He drove erratically back and forth across lanes. He looked disheveled, tired, unfamiliar. Connie gathered enough courage to, "What's going on?" "It's ye too fucking car, Connie," he yelled as he smashed the steering wheel with his hand. She jumped and jerked her face towards the window, regretful she had spoken to him. There still exists a general state of either denial, complacency, or even apathy about both the reality and potential effects of Y2O. He turned up the radio as Leonard Nimoy's voice filled the car. "At the stroke of midnight January 1st, 2000, credit cards and ATM may cease to function, airplanes and trains may come to a halt." Connie closed her eyes. Finally, she felt them take a left into their driveway. She got up the nerve to look, and to her great relief, Mom's car was there. "Anna, honey, I'm sorry, but this is overwhelming. He keeps calling and calling. Why don't you head on for the day?" Mrs. Davenport cooed. "I'm so sorry. He's scared about the new year, Y2Co and all." Anna's voice got smaller as she spoke, eventually erupting into quiet, desperate tears. Mrs. Davenport pulled her close and embraced her. While Anna wept, she said, "God will protect you, darling. Go forth with faith and hug your babies." Anna nodded and gathered her things. She had to get Tyler and find Connie, quickly. Matt always had an edge to him, but Anna chalked it up to a stoic nature. He had been sober for going on 5 years, and he had quieted a lot in that time too. He'd always had a temper. He could be so cruel, but he could also make her feel so loved. There was such a duality to his nature. For a decade now, he had kept her abused and confused. Back and forth. Not anymore. Anna had finally gone to a lawyer, a friend of a friend. With a secret savings account and some financial help from her parents, she had made a plan to leave. She had to. Y2K had tipped him over the edge. He believed that the whole computer system would collapse, that airplanes would fall from the sky, that hell would befall the earth. But Anna felt like hell had already found her. She walked right into it yesterday when she had to go into the shed. His cave. She didn't want to, but the neighbors had been complaining about the smell. Delilah threatened to call the authorities if it didn't get sorted out. She couldn't hold herself together as she climbed into the car, recalling what she had seen. Anna pushed open the door to the shed. The stench was unbearable. There were flies everywhere. Their loud buzzing sounded like a chorus, humming a devilish chant. It overwhelmed her, but she let her feet creep closer and closer inside. Sunlight pooled into the center of the wooden shack, casting light on the horrific reality of her husband's mental state. She stumbled back and caught hold of the workbench as her mind tried to process the scene in front of her. The 6 rabbits were hung in a circle from the low rafters, filleted open from their chest to their groin. The filleted skin safety pinned behind their back, exposing their entrails and allowing them to dangle over a pentagram drawn in salt on the ground. The entrails were shriveled, dark, rotting, dripping. Ah. Ew. Ah. Y2K was written in black wax in the center of the star with a large picture in the middle. Blood soaked the person's face, but Anna could tell it was a photo of Connie. A black candle adorned each point of the pentagram. Photos of Anna were in each of the triangles that made up the star. The hearts of 5 rabbits had been stabbed into the center of her photos with long nails, pinning her and the organs into the blood-soaked ground. The last heart and a pair of testicles he nailed to the large picture of Connie, the heart nailed to her chest, and the testicles over her womb. She felt faint. Something sticky was on her palm. What is that? She turned around in shock and horror as she came face to face with the head of a large black goat. The goat's eyeballs had been pulled from their sockets but left dangling from the skull. The beast's huge testicles had been removed and shoved into the back of its mouth. Its tongue left dangling from the dislocated jaw. The flies and maggots were everywhere, eating the tongue. What was left of the creature's eyes, crawling in and out of its ears and nose. The bugs gave the illusion that the head was moving. It twitched and vibrated as if it were living. Anna's vision blurred. The flies turned their attention to her. They crawled all over her face. They bit her skin. They swarmed her like a dark force flooding in to devour her. She tried beating the flies off as her eyes traveled across more photos of Connie. They were all over the altar, red candles strewn haphazardly around them. He had taken the reproductive organs of the rabbits and had placed them in small clay bowls around the altar, the blood, organs, and fleshy mush mixed with clippings of Connie's hair. Anna gasped as her eyes lost focus. The flies swarmed into her mouth, choking her. She coughed and gagged. She fled and cried and cried and cried. Anna filled with panic as a thought crept into her mind. What if he knows? What if he knows I was in there? What if he knows I'm leaving? Ever since she left the shed, she had felt stalked, watched. Was it her own fear? Or what if? Inside the house, Connie screamed, "Mom, ball." She felt tears swelling up inside of her. Her mom ran quickly out of the kitchen to her. "Connie," she sighed with relief. "What's going on?" Connie asked as her younger brother zoomed past her. He had a gym bag and was hurriedly collecting toys. "Is Tyler packing?" Mom kissed her forehead. "Dad's insisting we go to Mima's. He thinks we will be safer out there in the middle of nowhere, and wants..." "Anna, damn it, Anna." "Yes?" Mom breathed. "I want to be out of here in 5 fucking minutes," he said as he pointed his finger in her face. "Daddy, Dad, I'm ready." "That's my boy, Ty. Go to the car. Get buckled in." Dad turned back to Connie. "Get packed now." With that, he walked through the back door, and with a heavy slam he was outside, heading for his shed. "Connie, go. Pack for a few days, just in case." Why couldn't Mom tell him no? Connie wanted to be mad at her mom, but she couldn't. Her mom looked so shaken and exasperated. Almost as if Mom was reading her mind, she said, "Well, be all right with me, Ma. She knows how to handle your dad." Connie rushed upstairs to her bedroom and closed the door. Her heart began to race as hot tears fell down her face. She didn't want to leave. She was supposed to go to Liz's birthday party tonight. It wasn't fair. Still, she packed and headed outside. Mom was packing bags into the car. Tyler was in his seat playing with his new Tamagotchi. Connie put her bag on her seat and hurried inside to get her iPod. She approached her backpack and saw Dad. He was standing at the kitchen sink, singing to himself. "Are you washed in the blood? In the soul-cleansing blood of the Lamb?" Done. Meemaw lived outside a small city in the Appalachian Mountains. She was at least 4 miles from her nearest neighbor. She was a loner, a doomsday prepper, but not a very good one. She'd gotten lost along the way and was really just a hoarder. The closed, tight spaces of her dirty house made Connie feel like she was trapped in a maze. But at least it would be easy to disappear in the maze. Meemaw always seemed to have a way with Dad, too. Maybe she could help. Her favorite song by the Goo Goo Dolls came on. She closed her eyes and took refuge in losing her thoughts to its familiar sound. She woke up sometime later, surprised she had fallen asleep. Mom was sternly exclaiming, "Why aren't we going to the house?" Connie looked at Tyler, who was already looking back at her. Dad ignored Mom and continued down the dirt road that ran the perimeter of Meemaw's property. Mott, why couldn't she just shut the fuck up? All she does is complain. 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 She expects me to lay down and abide by everything she wants. Well, I don't fucking need traitors like her. The radio turned to static, so I shut it off. It was light outside, but not for much longer. She's still fucking talking? Her voice getting quieter, like she's trying to pacify me. Treat me like I'm a fucking child. Yes, Master. You have all the power. Master. You decided everything masterful. Anna, can you just shut the fuck up? After an eternity, the car came to a stop. Dad sat, wringing his hands back and forth on the steering wheel. Then he laughed. "You want to know what the fuck's going on? This is it," he said with alarming volume as he burst into laughter once again. "You'll see what I've been doing, and you will thank me, and call me savior." Her dad's words came spitting out of his mouth like a cobra inflicting venom on its prey. "I did all this for you? And what the fuck are you doing for me? What have you ever done for me, Anna? He screamed the last words so loudly that Connie's ears rang. Then he slammed the door with such force that the car rocked back and forth. Mom hurried to get out of the car, looking back at them as she stood up. The children were abruptly left alone, the rage left ringing in their ears. Matt walked to the back of the car, started taking things out, then walked into the clearing and stooped over a metal door, protruding from the ground. Anna heard herself yelling, crying, and begging him. "This is not okay, Matthew. Knew we shouldn't have come. You can't make us. We can't take the kids in there. Terrifying. Nothing bad is going to happen. Trust in the Lord, for He is our strength. We have a life. Please." She caught hold of his right shoulder, and as she did, he grabbed her arm. She looked up into his eyes and saw only darkness. His pupils were huge. His typically blue eyes had no color. An eclipse in his soul. The only light he had was pushed behind darkness. He pulled her closer, his face twisting and contorting beyond recognition. "Bet told me you went to Lucas's office. You fucking leaving me." Anna shrank. Every part of her body was shaking, and she felt nothing but terror. Sensing this fear, her husband laughed and laughed, delighting in the panic he was causing her. I squeezed her arm tighter. I could feel my fingers pressing together between the bones in her arm. "Has to hurt," I mused. I closed my eyes. "It's finally time." I squeezed Anna as tight as I could before shoving her to the ground. "Who's the master now, stupid cunt?" I unscrewed the top of the flask and drank until my mouth burned. You really fucking thought I wouldn't find out." Anna was pleading. She stood up and wrapped her arms around her chest as she started backing away. If it weren't for the new year creeping in, I think I would have enjoyed keeping this fear going. Torment her like she's tormented me. Ungrateful bitch. I was going to show you mercy. Let you help Connie raise pure children of the earth. Belial said you can't have light without the dark. Connie's a woman now. He came to me through the goat. His serpents through the rabbits. Y2K will cleanse the earth of the sins of man. We are chosen to bring the light back to this earth. And that's what I intend to do. They told me to stock the bunker for 2 years. Enough time start raising a new child of God. A king who will walk amongst the rubble and resurrect the honor of mankind. I turned my head to the sky. Raindrops. Storms here, just like they said. I couldn't help but laugh, raising my arms to the sky. But the darkness had to be tended to, so that the light could prevail. Connie watched in anguish as a gun was aimed directly at her mother. Dad had his head facing toward Mom, but his eyes were still fixed straight up at the darkening sky. He started shouting as loud as he could. "Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord." Boom! Connie felt herself leap out of the car. Dad ran to her and caught her. He threw her over his shoulder and carried her through the field. Then he stopped. She heard coughing, choking, wheezing. A horrific, almost otherworldly sound. She pressed her face into his jacket and prayed. "Look at her face, Kuanii." He bellowed. She felt her father put her on the ground. She couldn't hold herself and fell to her knees. He gently put the gun to the back of her head. Unwillingly, she turned towards what was left of her mother. Half her skull was gone, blown away by the gunshot. Her mom's remaining eye fixed on her. She was gurgling, convulsing. Foam sprayed from her mouth. Her hand reached out to touch her daughter one last time. Her chest lurched, twitching up and down towards the sky. Connie could see blood pooling around her head like a halo, the hot blood steaming in the cold December air. What was left of the right side of her brain was starting to slip down through the hole where her right eye and ear used to be. Connie tried to grasp her hand. Can't be tolerating non-believers. Out of time for... She was lifted up again. Connie looked back to see her mother's hand laying on the grass, abandoned. He forced her through the metal door. She fell down a ladder and onto a platform. The back door to a school bus was open behind her. What the... The door crashed shut. Connie was in complete darkness. She wasn't sure if it had been a minute or 10 minutes, but the door flung open again and Tyler was tossed inside. Her father came in. Click, dot, click, click. 3 padlocks. Then light. She grabbed for her brother. In a corner of the room was a rocking chair. Dad leaned over it, rocking it, back and forth. It looked like someone was in there. The endless horror continued as she saw Mimo. Her hair was standing up on end. Her mouth had been sewn shut and her eyes sewn wide open. The dried blood ran from her eyes and mouth down her neck and looked black against her ghastly white skin. Tyler screamed and fainted, unable to handle the unimaginable horrors surrounding him. Dad found this hilarious. His laugh came out with an evil and raspy resonance. He grabbed Mima and kissed her on the cheek. She squealed. I knew you'd want her here. Come on, sit on her lap. He howled louder with laughter as he slapped her leg. She tipped forward, ropes tying her to the rocking chair, preventing her from falling. Now we are ready for the new millennium. Dad pointed at Connie. We will be Adam and a pure Eve. He lowered his voice and moved towards her. We will bring the kingdom of heaven to earth. Connie closed her eyes. She wished she could have disappeared in that hallway at school. The abyss had followed her, and she watched in extraordinary horror as it staggered towards her. Happy Yai too, her dad's voice echoed. Skin. From the epidermis, all the way to the glands, oils, and nerves. Elasticity was a must, which can only be achieved by splurging on $400 caviar-based creams, formulated with collagen and vitamin C for a fuller look. Being a New York socialite meant massaging and rolling and icing and doing everything humanly possible to escape an inevitable death. Aging. The passing of a woman could either be marked by having her firstborn, the first silver strand in a once luscious mane, or when her ruddy complexion starts to mutilate and droop into a melted puddle of youth. Legs. Women should be as smooth as a seal, but her shoddy shaving skills left her rough and calloused like the hands of a construction worker. Her legs were littered with nips, but any time they would even begin to transform into scabs, she made good use of her long fingernails to pick and scratch them off. That was the norm with any wound, regardless of its shape or size. For some reason that only God himself can fathom, excoriating her skin was her favorite pastime. Hair. Somehow, her short black bob was always well maintained with different treatments, pomades, and masses. She preferred her hair when it was choppy, to elude everyone under the impression that she was a cool girl. In this day and age, the most gratifying compliment one could receive is that of the cool girl. Cool girl is a persona someone only few could successfully embody. It meant being able to eat tons of food while sustaining a slim figure. Additionally, part of the role was being exceptionally understanding, meaning that you let everyone spit and step and chastise you. Being breathtakingly beautiful, humorous, but never funnier than any men in the room, and willing to bend over backward to fill everyone's utmost desires yet, leaving no time for yourself, was the sacrifice of the cool girl. It was a sacrifice she chose to make every day, and everyone believed her. Why wouldn't they? Her seemingly laid-back demeanor was New York City's performance of the ages. Stippling with a brush, then smoothing with a damp sponge, and at last, setting with heaps of powder. A transformative flick of mascara, just while the fake eyelash glue becomes tacky. Then it's time for the cheeks. A flush of color, to appear as more youthful, although all that coverage aged her by at least 5 years, and a light bronze to seem as if the sun only shone on her. A pencil colors outside the lines to elude the audience, topped with a tinted holographic gloss to set her apart from the crowd. She was done constructing her perfect, Barbie-like self. On the analog clock, it read 7:45. The gathering, located on the Upper East Side, commenced at 8:02. After giving her friend Heidi a call to confirm their appearance at the party, she carefully went down the marble steps of her penthouse and waited in the lobby. Tick, tick, tick. The clock in the entryway was driving her mad, paired with the deafening silence in the room. What were seconds felt like minutes, while minutes were more like hours. Maybe she was too familiar with the fast-paced, go-go atmosphere of the city, but this was unbearable. Pick, Mike, pick, pick. A rhythmic pattern of picking and scraping her flesh and flicking it off was endless. To her, it felt relaxing, therapeutic almost. Just until the time passed, she was zoned out into the paced ticking of the clock and the soft sensation of her freshly torn hands. Beep, bite. Beep, bite. Beep, bite. The alarm she had set when it was time to leave went off, and with that, she made her way down the elevator and onto the main floor of the building. Walking down the hallway, she gave her doorman a quick nod and smile of appreciation. However, he abruptly stopped her. "Ma'am, I'm afraid I'm going to be leaving early due to my son's pneumonia. Is it all right if you arrive before 11:00? He inquired. As opposed to being attentive and making a mental note of his words, all she could focus on was the decay of his teeth. She grimaced while she continued to analyze this man's face. His pores are colossal. And why is he so saggy and worn down? Ugh! And his untamed, rope-like eyebrows. This guy is in serious need of a facial and a pair of tweezers, she thought. "Ma'am, you cannot enter the building otherwise. So, is that a yes?" the man asked, his words breaking her trance. What? Oh, yes," she mumbled, remembering that there was a conversation ongoing. Clearing her throat, she berated, "Excuse me, I pay well over your salary as rent, and I expect the services to be first rate. If I had known about your absolute unprofessionalism, maybe I could have come earlier. But no, absolute to cover your shift, or don't even think about coming to work tomorrow." Her heels clacked away, hopping into the cab, giving the doorman no time for justifications. Adjusting herself into the seat, she whips out a $20 bill and says, "Marquis, please." The cab driver, a man well into his 40s with a friendly face and dark curls, responded, "Sure, Miss Gro." With that, the engine revved, and they began their journey to the newest, hottest, and most voguish spot in the city, Marquis. A sea of admirers followed her under the scintillating lights she was well accustomed to. As the group inside saw her, heads turned, and a silent awe came down over everyone present. "Come, come," Heidi called out, wrapping her arm around her while teasingly whispering, "Looks like somebody is the star of the night." "Oh, please," she shrugged modestly. "I'm nothing compared to you." However, Heidi's playful comment lingered deeply inside her head. It started to gnaw at her, and although she struggled to push it aside, it stayed. "Have I become captive of the image I created?" she brooded. Thoughts like, am I even a star? Do people just pay attention to me as an escape from their miserable lives? Or, how can I embrace the attention while also navigating the line between receiving what may be a genuine compliment or trying to make me feel like an object, a feast for their eyes? I'm certainly not living it. And if this is the dream, why does it resemble a sinister nightmare? All raced through her head. This, like many other things, caused her to pick. She started making her way through the folds, lines, and previously irritated areas. Patches of craggy and dry skin were soon peeled off to reveal their beautiful pink interior. Then she moved on to the cuticles, her favorite. She picked, scratched, and sometimes nibbled at the skin around the nail. Of course, this caused it to tear or rip a little, but who can deny her of the pleasure this compulsive habit provides? With this, Heidi turned to look at her, due to the disturbing manner of her actions. However, Heidi was stopped before Danica's almost animated voice broke her rumination. "Ladies," Danica cheered, "you'll never believe who I just found." Although she was shaken up, both Heidi's and her interest piqued, and they began to follow Danica through the opulent walls of the club into a dimly lit private room. "Ta-da! This is my friend, Joe Dean," Danica introduced slyly. She had already seen Joe during Fashion Week walking the Versace show as the opening model, but never thought too much of it. Joe was a rather lanky but beautiful woman. Her bleached eyebrows and long dark hair had a very high fashion, haute couture look. She was the type of girl that was hard to come across, with her daring style and bold choices. Joe didn't play it safe to remain adored in the public eye like she did. Joe is a cool girl. There was no role, no acting, nothing. She just naturally possessed the ability to be loved and to be remarkable all at once. They took turns introducing themselves to Joe, then sat down at the conversation pit. Around half an hour went by, and the girls were blabbing on and on about the latest hairdos and how the scallops at Clover Hill were revolting. Soon enough, a waitress came by and asked, "Anything to drink?" They all looked around, waiting for someone who would volunteer to pay. Suddenly, all eyes were on her. It seemed as if their eyes were becoming larger, bulgier, and veinier. "No one is blinking. Why is no one blinking?" she thought frantically. "A good 20 seconds is going by. How can they not blink?" Eventually, all the guilt, pressure, and duress made her cave in, and she responded, "Oh, yes please." Joe wanted champagne, Dom Perignon specifically, while Danica was leaning towards a Cabernet. Ultimately, she ended up paying for 3 shots of Azul, a bottle of Dom, and 1 of Cabernet, racking up a bill of $745. She was not surprised. It was the same old story. Unfortunately, her status made it so that she was expected to support and finance everyone's drinking habits while simultaneously showing them a good time around all the groovy clubs of New York. The room, which was once lit by the comforting warmth of chandeliers, suddenly became overpowered by the harsh, blinding light of paparazzi cameras. The cacophony of shutters, clicks, and loud questions became intolerable. Heidi, Danica, and Joe jolted from their seats as if they were thunderstruck and began to hastily gather their purses. "Come on, we are trying to enjoy ourselves," Heidi snapped. "Yeah, you guys are animals," Danica added furiously. Despite that, the incessant shudders were not coming to an end. No matter the volume they complained at, or the amount of crude vocabulary used, for some reason, those mindless fans persevered. As the press continued their relentless chase, the room grew more and more tense. She could sense their piercing stares on her, and over her felt a sense of scrutiny, like a heavy weight on her body, leaving her vulnerable and defenseless. She couldn't muster a single word. There was no hope. Just constant shuddering which appeared to bounce off the walls of the room, ringing in their ears like a constant, never-ending drumming. Soon enough, the mob of photographers closed in on the group, yet she was shoved onto the floor, rejected. "Joe, over here, Joe. How does it feel like being the new cool girl of the season?" One paparazzi called out. "Your performance on the catwalk is flawless. Do you have any tips for beginners?" another questioned. Joe, feeling swamped, awkwardly chuckled and began to answer their questions kindly in the midst of the crisis. She could feel herself spiraling. "Why aren't they chasing me?" she gasped, barely taking in the air. "Why, her? Dio, Keshawandi." Racking her brain, she was in desperate need of answers. She felt robbed of the one thing she valued dearly: attention. Her forehead was periodically dripping sweat like a faulty faucet, and her battered hands were trembling. Forgotten and alone, she lay there on the cold, hard floor, which provided no comfort. Her fragile psyche was unraveling piece by piece, and she began to do the one thing she loved most: picking. At first, it was peeling long, thin strips of dead skin from her face. Then her grimy nails started going underneath the surface, prying and probing into her flesh. There was no blood, just a light pink layer revealed beneath. With each camera flash and ounce of attention given to Joe, more and more parts of her face were excoriated. Soon enough, she used her fingers to dig small holes, revealing her dermis. The thick coating that constructed her face, one which once beguiled anyone who saw it, was all lying in a pile, flicked off. Her glistening muscle tissue was bare, and what was a nervous tic escalated into grotesque self-mutilation. Gial. Soon enough, her wish came true. All eyes were on her. Clothed in a classic little black dress with matching red bottoms and a 20-motif necklace, she had to be the most stylish half-dead carcass of all time. A profound silence fell over the room, but not for long. Promptly, the waves of shuddering, conversing, and clicking burst again, like they never left. Paparazzi quickly resumed their interview with Jo Dean, the new star. She was well aware of New York's superficial and shallow lifestyle. What seemed like a dream, with billboards plastered all around Times Square with flashing beams of color, was all just a sham. No one cared until you had boatloads of money, a pretty face, or status. Not just regular civilians cared about that, but also paparazzi. Random people weren't just interviewed. No, there had to be a certain rank, and when someone fell out they were gone, forgotten. She was now an old, shriveled and jumbled mess that the paparazzi were oblivious to. But this was supposed to be her moment, and her prime. As the focus shifted toward Joe, it was brutally obvious how fast she had fallen. With a swift turn, she stomped over to the crowd, shoving them aggressively one by one. Struggling to stand up on both feet, her body wobbled, but it was not long until she quickly regained her balance. Her fierce, go-getter nature was with her all her life, courtesy of her fervent mother. However, this prediction couldn't be found on any horoscopes, tarot cards, or other devices. This was overboard. Being intense was one thing, but this was in a whole different universe. Every passing second made the audience tremble, however. They thirstily anticipated what her fragile body was going to do. With a pounce, Joe's pristine face was butchered and tugged at the especially tough bits. "Ah! Help! Oh my!" Joe wailed, before quickly going unconscious. Even the most dazzling stars vanish into dust. In the merciless spotlight, she left nothing but the remnants of their glory. "You were staring at me with those eyes again. It was the look you got when you were working out a puzzle, searching for the piece that would fit," finding it, turning it, flipping it, and when it wasn't fitting in, that wave of confusion that drifted across your face like a vapor. You looked at me that way through my whole life. All I wanted you to do was to look at me like you looked at David. I didn't know I was missing something before David existed. It was good, then. You cooked me breakfasts and read me books like Millie Molly Mandy and the Boxcar Children. I wondered what it would be like to live alone, away from you, away from Daddy, in a box on my own in the woods, with no people, just a creek and a bush to collect berries from. It was the book I would ask you to read again and again. It was my favorite because it gave me hope that one day I wouldn't have to live with you. You didn't know I would catch you staring at me. I would look up from the TV set, my eyes shifting from that purple dinosaur Barney to you in the corner, with a teacup of Earl Grey growing cold beside you, to catch you staring at me, staring through. Your eyes were dark and vacant, like your soul had escaped. The curtains were closed, and it seemed you were too tired to close the lids of your eyes. Maybe you didn't have the energy. You often said, "I'm tired." I suppose this is what tired looked like. You bathed me that night, and I didn't like it, so I lifted my chin and bit you hard on your forearm. Your eyes flashed. I liked what I saw. There was life in them then. The dead centers came alive as your hand came down. You were going to slap me. I could feel the energy of it vibrating the air, but you stopped before your flesh met my flesh. You got up from your knees. I could see your pink track pants soaked through. You pulled a towel from the bar to dry yourself and flung the door open and left me there, alone in the bubbles, a blue rubber ducky blinking at me from under the suds, foam letters that spelled my name floating away from T-A-R-A. The R was under the tap. Bike wike. I watched drips of water drop onto the yellow foam. I could taste your blood on my teeth. It was salty. Daddy found me, with nothing but my nose poking out of the bubbles. The water was cold by then. I could hear you crying from your bedroom. Daddy pulled me from the water and wrapped me in a little mermaid towel and carried me to my room. I can still smell him, Old Spice and sweat. A day's growth of beard rubbed against my cheek as he leaned in to kiss me, before he pulled my purple duvet over my warming body. He waited until he thought I was asleep, before he went to you in the bedroom you shared next to mine. The room with the bright windows looking over the park where you took me on days when you wanted to drink your tea someplace other than home. I loved to sit by the middle window, the one above the seat that lifted. I found treasures in there. Sometimes I hide treasures in there. The windows were never bright after David. Heavy curtains were drawn across, and you would tell me to come away from there when I would lift the edge. The window was nailed shut now. It was too bad. I used to love the way it would swing open. I loved sitting in front of it, feeling the wind push my hair from my face. I could hear the tone of Daddy's voice rising, the pitch crawling higher, and your sobs coming softer. I heard the words then. I didn't know what they meant, but I knew you meant them about me, because you used the word she. I was never Tara to you. I was she. She is evil, you said. I knew what you said about me was bad, because Daddy started screaming louder. She is just a child, Lyona. I fell asleep to the sound of your sobs. In the morning, you toasted me a crumpet and drizzled warm honey on it, and watched me as I dipped my fingers into each hole and then licked the honey from my fingertips. One of your eyes twitched. You looked away and quickly went back to the stove. I watched you pick up the leftover oatmeal and go to the corner where David's high chair used to sit. The garbage can is there now. The high chair is in the basement. Sometimes I go down there when you are laying on the sofa, when the TV is tuned to all my children and your eyes are closed. I take my Violet doll, and we go down, and I dress her in David's clothes. The blue romper I watched you button over his belly, your nose tickling his belly button till he giggled. Then you would giggle and do it again, and again, until you were laughing so hard, I could see wet tears come loose. I would dress Violet in the blue romper, and I tried to rub her belly with my nose to hear her laugh the way David did, the way you did. She stayed plastic, and her legs would never bend right to get her to sit up in the high chair, so I stopped trying. When I came back, you were standing at the top of the stairs, staring at me from a dark place. I don't think you even blinked. Even now, you still don't blink. I smiled at the thought as I reached for the light switch to illuminate the same stairs you stared from 20 years ago. My hand seemed to guide my feet, sliding down the handrail Daddy installed just after you lost your balance the day you fell. The day your head hit the cement floor. I picked up my marbles before you woke up and put them in my pocket. The black one was always my favorite one. I didn't want to lose it. Now, only the amount of dust had changed. I could see what I had disturbed rising to the light like an eclipse of moths. And David's high chair, it was in the back corner now, covered in a sleeping bag and a box that with Tara written in bold letters in black Sharpie ink. The last remnants from my room. You must have packed them after I left for university. I pulled the giant suitcase from the corner, the one where you kept all of David's things. I knew you put them there a long time ago because I snuck down there one day and watched you move Bugsy the elephant. His blanket, and that blue romper from the cardboard box. It was in on the day you found mice poop next to the furnace. I watched you put your nose into the romper. I watched you cry, and I wondered why you had loved him more than me. He made you smile. I didn't make you smile, at least not very often. There was the one day before David was born, when he was still round in your belly, when I had put my ear on your skin and felt his foot on my cheek. It surprised us both, the kick from under your skin, and at once we laughed out loud. Your hand pressed the back of my head, and I could feel your fingers run through my hair, feeling the strands as if you just discovered they were there. I looked up at your eyes then. They were not dark, they were dancing. They are not dancing anymore. I pulled the suitcase up the stairs and laid it on the floor. I pulled out the little things that belonged to David. If I closed my eyes and breathed deep, I could imagine the smell of his skin clinging to the fibers. Is this why you did it? Kept them for so long? So you could still smell him? The talc powder? The unused diaper? The faded ink of baby elephants on the sticky tabs? You would never smell him again. It was good after David was born. Your eyes stopped hovering over me darkly and lit up under his toothless grin. You would kiss the drool on his chin as you washed crusted milk from the folds of skin. Daddy would smile at you and pet me on the head, and before he would go to work, he would say his girls would take good care of his boy. You would smile up at him as I inspected David. He had just taken his first step the day before he died. I remember how you and Daddy clapped for him as he leaned from one foot to the other, forgetting to bend his knees if he knew to do that at all. He smiled, he drooled, and he clapped back. I was thinking of that when I packed the suitcase. The way he tipped heavily from one side of his body to the other without tipping over. The way you laughed and clapped, and how Daddy did too. It was like he did something amazing when it was just walking. I did that every day. Your eyes didn't dance for me that way. I wondered if it would have been different if David had never been born. If your eyes had just stayed dark on me and had never learned to light up. If he just never existed, then you had just made your bed. Dirty linens were picked up off the floor, and I was watching you from the window seat. David was playing with a tube of mascara you had pulled from your bathroom shelf to give him something to drool on. You were both freshly showered. You both glowed, skin scrubbed clean, your hair still up in a towel, his damp curls drying in the air. He was in a diaper, you were in your sweats, the pink ones. You left with the dirty linens, and David crawled to me at the window seat, and I jumped down and lifted his Raleigh body up. Together we would watch the bird with blue wings flutter leaves on the branch. He stood tall against the glass, and his hands banged it, and he laughed when his own sound startled the bird. I always loved it when that window swung open. You came through the bedroom door, just David leaned against the glass. I watched you both. You had horror on your face. David was giggling. Then I heard a sharp intake of breath as he felt the window leave his palms, as his body moved forward with nothing but air between him and the garden. You were close enough to hear the same thud I did when he hit the ground. Lights the color of red and white flashed like Christmas. I stood beside you as your body sobbed over David's. I reached out to touch you and you pushed me away. I wanted to be held in the same way you held him. I grabbed onto your leg. The medic pried my fingers off your pink sweats when he took you with him into the ambulance. I was left with Mrs. Jones. You were left to tend to your dead son. Your eyes never lit up again after that, and you shivered if we were left in the same room alone together. You got skinny because you never ate, and whatever you ate, you gagged on as it came back up. You moved out of the bedroom, Daddy slept in, and took your pillows and comforter to the sofa. It smelled like you, and I would sit on it and watch Sesame Street. Scent of you coming from the comforter that was folded and placed on the side of the sofa. 2 pillows and blue floral pillowcases left on the top. You and Daddy didn't talk much after that. He moved out before I went to university. He remarried. You never did. You called me last week and asked me to come to dinner. Some things you wanted to discuss. You were feeling bad that you hadn't been a better mother. I think you had been drinking wine. It seemed to be the only time you would talk to me. I arrived in the afternoon. You greeted me at the back door. It was the door I was always most comfortable using. You had spent the morning making us a harvest salad, roasting yams, and toasting pine nuts. I could see the square box grater laying sideways and the sink shreds of Parmesan pearled on the sides. We ate mostly in silence. You asked me about school. I said it was fine. You asked me about my boyfriend. I said he was fine too. I watched your face turn purple before you knew you were having a problem. Your lips, the very edges of them pulling blue as they begged for the oxygen that was diminishing. I saw your hand as it dropped the fork and reached toward your throat, as if you could somehow dig your fingernails in enough to let the air in. I picked up the glass of wine you had poured me and took a sip as I watched you gasp. I put another bite of my salad and chewed radicchio lettuce between my back molars as I watched your arms flail. I was savoring the flavor of the toasted pine nuts when I watched the final light leave your eyes, leaving them dark forever. Your eyelids still too tired to close over them. They stared like they had stared at me my whole life. Vacant and dark. When I finished my lunch, I picked up my plate and wine glass. I picked up your wine glass too. I knew it was best to wash out any remnant of the foxglove I had laced your wine with. I left your plate where it was. I could have left you on the floor where you laid, but I had thought of a better idea, and that's why I had been in the basement pulling up the suitcase. It was big enough for your body. You were always a tiny thing. I folded you in without problem. I was mid-zip before I saw David's things still laying on the floor beside us. I always wished you had looked at me the way you looked at him. You never knew I learned about medicines that could inflict heart attacks the same way you never knew I knew how to unlatch your bedroom window. I was always good at puzzles. There were so many things you didn't know about me. I turned you to your side and folded your legs up under you. You laid in that suitcase the way that David laid in your womb. I covered you with his blanket and tucked Bugsy in your arms. You looked like you were sleeping. I stood up and observed you. Your whole life lying there in that suitcase. I closed your eyes before I zipped it up, so I would never have to see you stare at me that way again.